This book is titled Samsung Rising, the inside story of the South Korean giant that set out to beat Apple and conquer technology. It's by Geoffrey Kane. What I want to do is I want to speak a little book about the book and the author and what the thrust of the book is. That's by way of an introduction. And then there are three parts which I want to address in greater detail. One is about Samsung itself, the leadership it has, the organization that has come about, and what really makes it tick. The next part of the book, the meat of the book, is in how Samsung beat Apple and the steps which Samsung took in order to establish technological dominance. The third part of the book is about what I call the Republic of Samsung, which is the relationship between Samsung and the politicians. So these are the three key parts of the book. And I want to end with a few takeaways that I'd like to place before you so that we can have a discussion. So that is the scheme of today's presentation. I hope it will be interesting. If any of you are really bored or something, raise your hand and maybe we can change the subject or whatever you want. But I'll try to keep it short. My aim is to complete the analysis and review of the book in about half an hour to 40 minutes, and then to encourage a discussion amongst us, not only on the takeaways that I have placed before you, but also any other thoughts and suggestions that you may have. And I'd like to thank all my friends and colleagues for having joined this afternoon. So about the book, as I said, this book has a racy feel to it. It's kind of behind the scenes look at what Samsung is, the great personalities involved in Samsung, and how, from very obscure origins, Samsung has become the largest smartphone company in the world. So it is really the inside story. And the author lived in South Korea for many years. He claims to have interviewed more than 400 people. And he says that he didn't receive any help from Samsung as he went along, which means it's a kind of an independent account. The book starts in a dramatic fashion. Years ago, when Samsung brought out its new smartphone called Galaxy 7, it thought Galaxy 7 will really beat Apple, the iPhone. But what actually happened was that Galaxy 7 exploded in the hands of the users, and it involved regulatory scrutiny. And following that, what the author describes as a great brand disaster, Samsung was forced to recall 10 million of these Galaxy 7s. And they discovered that the fault actually lay in the design of the battery compartment, that the battery compartment was not designed to absorb the expansion in the battery, which happens normally, and therefore short circuiting took place and it exploded. And it was entirely because of a Hong Kong manufacturer who was subcontracted by Samsung to do the job that, according to Samsung, led to this blow up. But the book also speaks in detail of how Samsung tried to obfuscate the matter, how it tried to stonewall all the requests, the dilatory tactics which it followed, and finally, it was forced to recall these phones, and it made a bonfire of those phones in order for the chairman to show how angry he was over this defective design. So from that, today Samsung is the #1 company in the world in terms of smartphones and technological appliances. Of course, the book shows that in the course of its journey of over 4 decades, it has absorbed a lot of failures, it has taken a number of missteps, but today it is having a kind of technological domination over the competitors, which is quite unique. And true to its calling, it has now announced a mission for 2030 in which Samsung says it will invest $115 billion into what it describes as non-memory chips. These non-memory chips will be used in artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, etc., in addition to its dominance in memory chips. So it's interesting really to go into how and why Samsung became what it is. And incidentally, Samsung stands for 3 stars. Star 1, for it to be bright always. Star 2, for it to be big. And star 3, for it to be always on the ascendant. Similar, incidentally, to Mitsubishi, which is 3 diamonds and which also has the same kind of reckoning as what the stars in Samsung had. With this introduction in the book, now I'll come to Samsung, the organization, the people who are in it, and the leadership. And by the way, I have gleaned all this reading the book, putting it all together. It is not in a particular sequence because the book goes a lot of back and forth, but I have tried to put it together so that we can have a coherent understanding of this subject. Samsung started from very modest origins. In 1936, Lee, K.H. Lee, incidentally, all the chairmen are called Lee, so this is Lee 1. Chairman K.H. Lee started as a vegetable seller in 1936. But really, he was driven by a lot of passion and energy. And I quote, he says, "People are happy when they know what gives purpose in their lives. I am unshaken in my faith of strengthening the nation through business. This is the path I must walk." This was what he said early at the start of Samsung. From then, partly because of the military regime of Park Chung-hee that came to Korea after it split up from North Korea, Samsung was marked by rapid expansion, diversification, and opportunities which it tapped in beer making, education, paper, fertilizers. And all this happened because of access with the military regime, which I'll speak about. So now the book also takes a peep at what is the organization of Samsung. The author says Samsung is a top-down organization, inward-looking, military approach. All employees are expected to conform to the diktats of the top management, a regimentation, and very different from what a Western type of organization would be. The chairman, the first chairman, K.H. Lee, had great belief in loyalty. And the book says that Lee himself interviewed more than 100,000 people in order to determine their suitability to be employees of Samsung. And in all this, for him, HR, human resources, was the key department because this department was expected to identify the individuals who possessed the proper work ethic and then put them in various jobs. Here is what Chairman Lee said, quote, "HR should be face to face with people, interpret candidates' eye, nose, lips, and get a sense of who they are." And then he exhorts them further. Quote, "Select those who valued loyalty, prioritized the cosmic self over the individual, and public over the private, capacity for diligent work coming from patriotism for a great public cause." So these were the words of Lee as he charged the HR department with recruiting employees for Samsung. Two terms caught my eye in the book early on. One was the Republic of Samsung, which I will speak about as we go along. The other, which is essential for this part of the discussion, is what is described as the Samsung man. Who is this Samsung man? Interesting. The Samsung man, the person who's recruited, who's expected to be in Samsung all through his life, is a lifetime generalist, a genteel and hard-working husband with a sense of corporate pride and belief in Korean ideals. And this Samsung man had also to have another key attribute, which is the Korean word nunchi. Nunchi. What is nunchi? Nunchi is to survive at all times. The art of gauging other people's mood, even when the other person says nothing. To feel the boss's emotion in a place of terse and sparse communications. So the Samsung man had to be genteel. He had to have a generalist outlook. He had to also have this nunchi. And besides that, there were certain other attributes that were screened for and encouraged. Belief in documentation, processes, reporting, and details. And finally, unquestioned acceptance of top diktats and having to work incessantly. So the diktats and having to work incessantly were all coming from the top. A group of decision makers close to the chairman, belonging to a circle called in Korean Kahun, like Omerta, for instance. This was centralized by the chairman, and the chairman in Samsung has a status akin to the emperor. Perhaps the best description of what a Korean should be is epitomized by Odd Job. You remember Odd Job from James Bond Goldfinger? Goldfinger says Odd Job was, quote, the cruelest and most ruthless man in the world, unquote. So, in the course of 5 decades, Samsung was transformed from a mere supplier of components and a backwater company to a world-class producer. Isn't that startling? How did it happen? The book says that in 1968, Samsung got into electronics with a 51% stake in Korean Semiconductors. This was on the chairman's hunch that semiconductors were going to be a high potential area. And although it was then dominated by Intel and Fairchild, Samsung could make a play of it. This was followed later by possessing a semiconductor plant in 1983. I said earlier that the chairman always used to exhort his employees and set searing visions for the company. In 1983, he called a meeting of all the executives, key executives in Tokyo, and he exhorted his employees as follows. This is K.H. Lee. Quote, we hope to advance in the semiconductor industry on the strength of our people's great mental fortitude and creativity. Another exhortation of the chairman came at the 50th anniversary of the company when, he spoke to all the employees gathered in a hillside, and then suddenly there was this giant picture of the solar system. Think about it. Giant picture of the solar system, PC conductors, DNA, double helix, orbiting satellite. All these images came in front of the people on that night, along with the tagline to become the leading corporation for humanity. So that was the kind of vision that the first chairman set for Samsung. And it was followed essentially because of 3 factors which I could glean from the book. One was the vision itself, which was articulated from time to time. The second was alignment of people in the organization with little discord and little disturbance. And the third was faultless execution. The vision, alignment, and execution. The next chairman who succeeded K.H. Lee was Lee Tu. And this gentleman also continued the vision of Samsung with his second foundation. And in the second foundation, a DRAM of 4 megabytes was released to great success. But close thereafter, the chairman diagnosed that Samsung was very vulnerable because it had fallen far behind tech giants like IBM, etc. And he said that in order to cure this false sense of belief, several steps had to be taken. So among those were, he sourced a Japanese designer called Fukuda to improve the standards in the company, set good standards for finish and design so that design could make things work and increase value through beauty. Design could make things work and increase value through beauty. The second chairman, Lee Too, also announced soon thereafter something called the Frankfurt Declaration. The book makes interesting reading here because it says that he gathered all the top executives of his company, took them to Frankfurt, hired the entire luxury hotel, and then discussed a strategy to raise quality and overcome competition. And on that basis, this Frankfurt Declaration was announced. The written text ran to more than 8,500 pages. It was spread over 30 hours. It was played at all management gatherings in the company, and it heralded a managerial revolution in the company. Here is what the Frankfurt Declaration says in brief, quote, the chairman says, at Samsung, 3 credos dominate. 1, faulty products are our enemy. 2, faulty products are the root of evil. 3, if you produce faulty products 3 times, you must resign. This was the admonition and exhortation that he held out in order to maintain the high standards of quality among all his employees. And incidentally, the chairman had such a vaulted position that if he were to merely express his displeasure at some employee, however high he was, the employee immediately submitted his resignation. So that was the relationship between the boss and all the others. The book says that this second chairman, Lee Too, was a very eccentric and reclusive person. He was a brooding, lavish spirit. And among his eccentricities were that if he went on a holiday, he would occupy the entire hotel, the entire luxury hotel. Or if he were to visit a factory, the factory managers would insist that no employee must come in his sight, or no cars of the employee should be visible to the chairman because it could offend his sensibilities. And something of interest to all our corporate types is that the Samsung board had no independent oversight. It was entirely packed with the nominees of the chairman and the company, and it did exactly what the top management expected it to do. I don't know what the position is today, but here is an interesting statement made by the author about Chairman Lee's eccentricities. Quote, spent time at home, refused to connect with others, loved watching movies, an artist with insight into Korean culture, a dog breeder who bred Jindo, Korea's national dog. And hear this, rumored to have fathered 95 children, akin to Genghis Khan. He was supposed to be on the drug Demerol. This was about the second chairman, Lee Too. I said in the beginning that 2 things that caught my attention were the Samsung man and the Republic of Samsung. I'll have more to speak about the Republic of Samsung because I think it's very important for our discussion. But basically what it means is that Samsung had ease of entry into all government activities. They were able to get quick approvals from government, and they were able to ensure that government acceded to all their requests for reasons that we can go into a little later. One feature in Korea that may astound all of us is that 50% of Korean leaders who held key positions were convicted. They were actually criminals who had received presidential pardon, including the Samsung chairman himself, the first man and the second man. They were convicted and pardoned twice by the presidents in power. The Samsung board chairman, who was not the chairman of the company, was sentenced to 18 months in prison for obstructing labor unions. So obviously, they did not have a lily-white record in managing Samsung. But again, the interesting thing is that Samsung was the most venerated company in Korea. And all families would have liked their children to join Samsung because it was the most sought after in terms of employment. So there is this division or dichotomy between Samsung in terms of its reputation for sleaze and so on, and Samsung as a preferred employer for the young. And I tried to find out what is the reason for this. And the author labels it as something called the Samsung risk. He says, Samsung was too big to fail. South Korean economy hinged on Samsung. If Samsung failed, South Korean banks ran the risk of insolvency. Despite several investigations, Samsung remained intact. So this is what the book says about Samsung, the organization, the leaders, and how Samsung really started on its journey. Now we come to the key part of the book, which is how Samsung beat Apple for technological dominance. At the start, Samsung began in a very humble manner as a supplier of chips to Apple. In fact, in 1983, Steve Jobs visited Samsung and he kind of congratulated them on the excellent work they were doing and told them to keep supplying these chips and other components to Apple. Samsung actually tested the waters of what it must do in order to gain dominance by moving into color TV for the first time. And what it did was, in 2 decades, it completely overran RCA, GE, Hitachi, who had then world dominance. How did it do it in terms of TVs? And the lesson is important because something similar to that was done in smartphones also. One is they got hold of all the key models of competitors, disassembled it, studied it, copied the parts, and then manufactured the parts in Korea entirely and put them back in production, except for 1 or 2 items. Secondly, there was a terrifically disciplined workforce in Samsung, which really practiced high productivity norms. And together with discipline, they were able to meet all production targets. So as a result, in 2 decades, Samsung's televisions outclassed the rest. And later the book says that no American manufacturers of TV were left. Samsung held the field. When it comes to smartphones, which is the key area of interest, it started first by supplying its mobile phones through carriers like Verizon, Sprint, and so on. And the book says that, Samsung practiced the most lavish forms of hospitality in order to schmooze these American executives and CEOs. The hospitality was really outrageous. The models were clunky because the emphasis was on volume, not value. And so Samsung's beginning in mobile phones was undistinguished. Nobody bought a Samsung phone per se. They would buy a phone from Verizon or Sprint or something like that. That is how it happened. So over the years, the dominance of Samsung over Apple was well planned and executed. And there were, of course, a few missteps that Samsung had to absorb. First, what it did was it expanded the semiconductor business by purchasing AST, which was then a major PC manufacturer. I think it was number 2 in America. But the purchase and acquisition soured, and Samsung sunk $1 billion into this, and AST had to close. But they had the requisite expertise in semiconductors by then. The second is an important step. Samsung hired the Art Center in Pasadena, California, to improve design and improve on their global models. And this art center set up in South Korea, IDS, which was the design center, innovative design lab to focus on quality and friendliness. So there was this huge ramp up in terms of design. And the third step was, in order to get a unique identity for its products, Samsung organized annual 9-week tours of major centers like Paris Louvre or the Taj Mahal or other great design centers for its engineers so that they could study these designs. And here is what the book says about Taj Mahal, quote, "Drape of sunlight reflected differently on the Taj Mahal dome and marble minarets, shifting the time of day, a thing of elegance and design beauty." Following that, the next step they took was what is called in Korean as Taeguk, Taeguk. That is to incorporate portability, value, sleekness, and minimalism into their design of product. To quote, the chairman said, "Taeguk is that Samsung should be harmonious to include rational and philosophical, work and yet look good, resonate with people, balance reason with feeling." That was the meaning of Taeguk, and that was the kind of spur which the chairman Lee Tu held out for all of Samsung's engineers, designers, and planners. And not only that, centers were set up in different parts of the world to get the best of design in those environments, including Los Angeles, Pasadena, and Delhi. The fifth step is very important, which is continuous product innovation. So it began with the first flip phone, which Samsung brought out without exterior antenna, called Benz. And this flip phone sold 10 million units. Then, at that point in time, Samsung released a high-class, thin, glossy television of 26 inches called Bordeaux, by which it overtook Sony and sold 3 million units. The blow was so much for Sony that Sony never recovered. And although Sony had great brands like Walkman, Trinitron, etc., it really went into loss. Its CEO left. An American CEO was appointed. That American CEO also had a very limited tenure. And he had a memorable statement. I'd like to quote that statement. He says, quote, "Running a company is like a cemetery. There are thousands of people below you, but no one is listening." It was a bit like that at Sony. This was the statement or lament of the CEO of Sony on why Sony lost out to Samsung. Then in 2007, challenging its own position as a supplier of chips to Apple, Samsung launched its own smartphone in competition to Apple, but with one difference, which is it powered its chip with extraordinary memory. And that memory, I have gathered, is something like 1,375 lakhs per chip compared to 2,300 per chip, which was what it was when it started out in 1971. 1,375 lakhs per chip. Because Samsung had a monopoly, near monopoly over these chips. And so you can imagine how powerful those initial phones must have been. Thereafter, it also released several superior products, smartphones, which continuously improved in terms of memory, power, computing, visual appeal, and access. They were the Galaxy S single premium smartphone, the Galaxy S3, the Galaxy X4. All these phones put together, the Apple stock was down by 37%, and Samsung, thanks to this product blitz, was able to ship more phones than all its rivals. So this is at one end the technological innovation, the product improvement that Samsung made. But there's something that I want to point out to you, which is even more crucial, which was the marketing and advertising strategy of Samsung. What Samsung tried to do was to portray itself as a cool, young, millennial oriented, smart, hipsterish company, as against Apple, which it said was dowdy, conservative, and backroom. It launched incredible ad campaigns, which I'll speak about in a minute. But more than that, it played on the psyche of the consumer and also product positioning. Some examples of its imaginative advertising are in order to launch microwave ovens in America, you had this muscular cab driver carrying an oven under his arm with the caption, "Simply healthy, eat Samsung." Or another advertisement with the caption, "Digital, everyone is invited," where it pooled $1 billion and launched a massive campaign to blast out the competition. Or its positioning of the product by making Samsung used by the leading actors in Matrix Reloaded. But something of interest to all our friends may be the great ad campaign it ran when it lampooned Apple and made people think that they were victims of Apple. So what happened was that, whenever Apple would release new models, people would queue up in the night waiting to get into the store and buy the new model. So here is this advertisement that sees a line forming of people waiting all night for Apple. And then as they are waiting, pedestrian is next to the line. He hails a taxi with a Samsung Galaxy huge screen 4G phone. And the taxi stops and he gets into it. So people are looking at him. And then the caption that says, "You don't need to wait in line. The next big thing is here." You don't need to wait in line. The next big thing is here. These ad campaigns caught the imagination of the public, especially the young group. And Samsung saw a terrific demand. In addition, I mentioned about its opportunistic use and product positioning. So during the 2014 Hollywood Oscars, they maneuvered to see that 9 Hollywood greats like Meryl Streep and Julia Roberts were caught with a Samsung selfie, using a Samsung phone. And then that selfie was tweeted and retweeted more than 1 million times until the Twitter collapsed that evening. Apparently, the selfie which captured all these 9 people was worth more than $1 billion. I'm saying all this to convey to you how Samsung got the better of Apple. And what the author says is as follows: Samsung is telling better stories and just plain art innovating its arch rival in Cupertino. Today, it has the highest share of the smartphone market in the USA and outbeat all its rivals, including Apple. I now come to the last part, which is the Republic of Samsung. So this book is rife with many examples of Samsung's unholy activities and its dealings with political leaders, cases of outright bribery, manipulation, and suppression of evidence. And it also points out that successive chairmen have been convicted and some of them have been imprisoned. And yet, Samsung continues to be as strong as ever, which is why it is labeled the Republic of Samsung, despite being a symbol of corruption. So there are 2 or 3 instances that I'd like to quickly mention to you because it gives you a flavor of what Korea was then or maybe what it is now. Under the leadership of dictator Park Chung-hee, Samsung, under Lee Won, the first chairman, put up a giant fertilizer factory. 330,000 tons was the production capacity. And there Samsung got involved in a corruption scandal, and the chairman was forced to give up 51% of the ownership. That was the first instance of corruption. The second instance is of stock market manipulation. The present chairman, Jay Lee, he had to succeed his father, Chairman 2, in 2014 because the second guy was very ill. But he didn't have a majority of shares, and there were also intra-family squabbles. So in order to augment his shares, what Samsung did was to have a deal by which company A would take over the shares of company B. Okay? And the takeover was at very unfavorable terms for the company being taken over. This was protested by a New York hedge fund and its owner, its dynamic owner. So Samsung went to town insidiously arguing that this person, this New York hedge fund guy, was Jewish. And all the Jews opposed genuine East Asian enterprise. They were also able to quell all protests against Samsung's unfavorable takeover terms in order to boost the chances of Jay Lee. The real thing was there was this Korean pension fund, and this Korean pension fund owned a substantial amount of stock. So in order for the takeover, it had to approve the terms. Initially, it resisted, but subsequently, because of pressure from the top, it acquiesced and it supported the takeover. In the process, the author says the Korean pension fund lost $500 million in valuation. But here is what the chairman said when he was asked, why did you approve? He said, quote, Samsung is a pretty unique organization. It is an excellent dynasty. I'm surprised that some people were not in favor of the merger. And when he was asked, so it suffered a loss of 500 million in valuation, what do you have to say for it? He said, well, I do not know when the loss will be recovered, unquote. So this is about the stock market manipulation that it resorted to. But the most interesting is this horse riding scandal. The president, who was Park Chung-hee's daughter, another Park, Lady Park, Miss Park, she asked Samsung to support the efforts of the Korean Equestrian Foundation, hinting that if you do so, we will support the management succession that you want in Samsung. So Samsung signed a deal with a little-known company based in Germany, run by a woman called Choi Soon-Soi, who was the daughter of the pastor who was advising the president. He had died, the pastor had died, but who was close to the president. And the deal was struck for $18.6 million to help the Korean Foundation. Apparently, Samsung also brought a horse for $800,000 for the daughter of Choi Soon-Soi. What happened was there was a scoop that revealed that this woman, Choi Soon-Soi, was privy to all cabinet correspondence and that she received classified material as well as cabinet secrets from the president's office even before it was made known to the public or declassified. She was labeled as Rasputin's daughter, this Choi Soon-Soi. And it created a massive outcry. There were demonstrations. She was tried, sentenced, and she's in jail now. The jail sentence is for 5 years. The president, Park, the lady, was also impeached, and she was also made to face a jail sentence. But the brunt of it fell on Samsung. It was involved in a great web of corruption, and the prosecutors alleged that Samsung gave the president a bribe of $38 million. So the vice chairman, Jay Lee, who is now the chairman since 2020, was charged on grounds of fraud, bribery, and perjury. So there was back and forth trials. retrials. I'm not going into all those details, except to say that initially, Jay Lee was sentenced for 2.5 years after the first sentence of 5 years was reduced by the court. Then, on the orders of the Korean Supreme Court, he was again tried, and this time he was jailed for 3 years. And that is when the book ends. But I read a statement in the internet which says that Chairman Jay Lee was released on August 13, 2021, last month, on the National Liberation Day of Korea. And the reason for the release was because of COVID conditions, needs of the vaccine, and semiconductors. The subtext was that, American Chamber of Commerce exerted pressure on the Korean president because Samsung was supposed to invest a substantial amount of money on semiconductors in the US. Jay Lee made the following statement to the Korean people last month on his release. He said, quote, "I have caused much concern. I deeply apologize. I am listening to the criticisms and expectations of the people. I will work hard," unquote. So as on date, he's still not been made the chairman. That requires approval. But technically, he's still there. Here is a postscript I want to place before you, before wrapping up. Despite all these jail sentences, the vice chairman being in jail, subsequently the chairman passing away and the vice chairman not succeeding him, Samsung continues to do spectacularly well, including in his absence. Galaxy 8 was released to record profits. A new folding smartphone called Galaxy Fold 2019 was released for nearly $2,000. Samsung has overtaken Apple as the most profitable company in the world today. And here is the punch. For every Apple iPhone that is sold, Samsung gets $130 in components. It still supplies components to Apple, and it rakes in a revenue of $4 billion every year from its sale of components to Apple. So folks, this is what I wanted to say about Samsung, the organization, how Samsung beat Apple, and Samsung and politics, the Republic of Samsung. To end, I have a few takeaways that I'd like to put before our extraordinary group in BIC. First, there's a great dearth of good business books about the East and about organizations in the East. At least that's what I think. This is because there's a preponderance of Western books and Western literature in our kind of understanding. This book corrects that deficiency, however racy and however telltale it is. So should we look eastwards in order to get some inspiration in how to make organizations function and so on? That's the first takeaway. The second takeaway is that, clearly Samsung has achieved technological and product dominance over the West. Is it possible for an Indian company to do likewise? If so, what does it require? Or is it only a Chaibol or Zaibatsu that can achieve these seemingly impossible results? Third, the Republic of Samsung dominates our narrative and mind. Business success for Samsung was achieved with substantial political support, including connivance, bribery, unethical means. So in a strong nation state, is this the way forward? Fourth, single-minded focus on success and achievement was the key to Samsung's success as an organization. This is also what we see in China with the Communist Party organizations. So our authoritarian, non-participatory forms of organization, the best way to go forward, especially as we want to accelerate growth and make change happen. So these are the four takeaways that I want to place before you. Thank you for your patient understanding. Nobody raised his hand, so the presumption is that you heard me. And now, over to you, Pratima, for discussion.
So it's open to the floor for discussions. Yeah, Viju, please go ahead.
Viju.
Let me make some attempt to comment on the four let's say important philosophical questions. I think your first question, without doubt, since case studies and MBA schools were West dominated, there's no doubt that the stories and the case studies are all predominantly Western. But as we see the growth of Asia and the increasing share that Asia plays in world business, we need to have far more case studies. So while we should look east, I think more important is that people have to start writing about Asian companies a lot more. There are a few, but a lot more need to be written. As you know, there's well-written 2 or 3 cases on Fab India, one which is presented in Harvard Business School regularly. And there are a couple more like that. But I think the business community has to start looking at, in particular, at Chinese companies. There are so many world-beating Chinese companies today, at a similar level like Samsung. If you look at Haier and Huawei and a few others like them, there are many major Chinese companies that need writing about. They've got their own stories. So as more is written, I'm sure we will find the opportunity to read more about Asian companies. The second question, I think that it's definitely possible for Indian companies to do so. At least you can say that Reliance and Tata's different aspects of their story so far have achieved significant note around the world for different reasons. I mean, technologically, you can definitely say that there was something special about some of the Tata, the Tata Nano. While it may have failed commercially, there were things about it that were noted worldwide as important technology breakthroughs, and a few other things. I mean, if you look at the refinery business of Reliance, there is no comparable refinery in the world with that level of efficiency and flexibility and cost. So there are areas where we can do better. There's also a view that Tata's organization structure is something unique. There are a few others in Europe, but there have been papers written about it. There's an interesting Harvard Business Review article written by our Professor Ramchandran from IIM Bangalore about that. So there are some areas, let's say, where we have achieved something, but we need to do a lot more. And therefore, you might say that the Tatas and Reliance are similar to Chaebols and Zaibatsus in some ways. So I don't know how to answer that. The other two, quickly, I strongly believe that you can succeed without political connivance, bribery, and unethical means, but that's a matter of faith. I mean, one can't prove anything one way or the other. All my life, I've lived in companies that did not involve themselves in these things. And Vinod might support me, at least as far as Hindustan Lever is concerned. But I'm sure many people will have the opposite view, and one can't prove it one way or the other. And the last point, I think, I don't think that that's the only way, but I think that fits well with the Korean ethos and culture. I think to a large extent that depends on the culture of the society around you. If you think about when Park took over power through the revolution in 1961, South Korea's per capita GDP was much lower than India's and significantly lower than North Korea. And there had no industry at all worth talking about. Everything was in North Korea. And if you look at where South Korea stands today, per capita GDP of something close to $30,000, all economists agree that this wouldn't have happened without the first, say, 30 years being under an authoritarian sort of regime. At the right time, they had to open up and become more democratic. But the first Park and then Chandu, whatever his name is, were important elements of building that. So maybe there is something to do with their culture and the times that they lived through, because Samsung's history also, is coinciding with that of South Korea. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to add. In fact, maybe I have met with Jay Lee. I have been to Samsung, was my customer. I have been to Suwon many times, which is the Samsung headquarters outside of Seoul.
Yeah.
Okay. I have gone through their security. I have gone through what do they do to make sure their secrets are well protected. So a lot of things in the book that is written are very, very true. It is but I can say I worked with a lot of Japanese companies too. There is the older Japanese companies are regimented, and I think Korea has learned from that. If you ask me, a lot of Chinese companies, they have also learned from Samsung, and a lot of them have copied the way Samsung has done. Okay, for example, the work culture. Some of you would have heard the term 699. 6 days a week, 9 to 9 working hours. Okay, so that is how Samsung was working. Okay, the pressure on the people to work long hours because their bosses work long hours, they work on weekends. The expectation in terms of very, very aggressive time schedules to do it. But in the end, it is the hard work that gives you results. That is what, if you ask me, what Samsung proves. It does not happen. Of course, unless you are in a very rich society like in US, where the per capita, income is high and the affordability of people to pay top dollars is high. That is how Apple kind of products can succeed. But the way Samsung has come up, it is a tough place, not easy. Being a supplier was very tough with them because their expectations are very, very high. So coming to the questions, what Jairas has pointed, I feel you need at certain time, particularly in the beginning stages of a society formation, you need some few very strong big companies to lift, to create a model and other things. I think both the Tatas have done it and Reliance have done it, and some of the older companies, in India have done it, but many have not done. A lot of the Birla companies and others, they have not migrated to the newer technologies, newer markets, newer things, the way to some extent Tatas have evolved, or what Reliance is doing now, learning from these things, get into new markets so that they go to the next level. So overall, it is very interesting. In fact, my son works for Samsung. He's working last 7 years. He works in the US, and of course, he says they have changed a lot over the last many years, particularly in the US. I don't know how much they have changed in Korea or not, but they pay top dollars. I know some Indians who moved from US to Seoul because they needed a lot of good software people, and they used to say they give top money, they take care of you very well, but they expect this 699 kind of a culture. So coming to Jay Lee, as I said, he came to Bangalore, and I, because he was my customer, we hosted him, got him meeting with Premji. He was not a typical American kind of a CEO, not heavy, big presence of, the way a lot of American CEOs tend to have. Of course, he was very young, and he was listening, and he was very interested in the whole story of Bangalore, how Bangalore has evolved, what the secret behind So all his questions were on that, what made Bangalore tick and how it has evolved to where we were and what were our roots and things like that.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Mr. Surappa. Yeah.
Professor Surappa.
Yeah, first of all, I thank Dr. Jairaj for giving a very excellent description of the Samsung's how it has risen, and also its main motive seems to be always succeed, no matter how you violate all the ethics from all dimensions in all 360 degrees. They violate all kinds of ethics, and still their main motive is, but they are very good in what you call creating a diktat for the employees, where the employees makes 3 mistakes manufacturing, he has to resign. I don't understand why the same company which did not follow, if the 3 presidents of the same family go to the prison, that I think the position should not have been given to any of the families of the family members to run that company at all. And the kind of a ethos that South Korean company has adopted now in succeeding, making profits, and continue to stay apart from enormous clout they had with the interrelations between the government and the Samsung, where the entire economy of the South Korea, depending on the Samsung's profit making. I think the governance system that Samsung has adopted, I think any Indian company should follow that kind of a companies. I've heard a story between the Fuji and the Kodak, how the Fuji was in the 1990s when with the digital transformations, it adopted all the digital photography and the cameras and diversified the things, maintaining the best governance practice, and they were able to beat Kodak, which was a 4 times bigger company than the Fuji Films. I heard from Fuji president recently, and there they have emphasis always on the best governance. And I think we Indians, just like an Indian politicians, this motive is always win, win, win. No matter how many times your FIR is filed against them. I think this is the kind of a business practices. I don't think that Indian companies should even think about it.
Thank you.
It's a very sad that that a company like that is still growing and making earning their profits. I don't know. So this is where I feel. And moreover, Samsung is a technology, as a very wide spectrum of technologies have got. Whereas Apple is only a smartphone and a software. So I don't know how the comparison,
Right.
between something is valid. So these are the things that I have got
Thank
in
you,
my mind.
Professor Surappa. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Pratima, what are your
can I
comments?
just make,
Yeah, please.
I just wanted to make a point here following Mr. Surappa's observation. One was it is being compared, okay, Apple and Samsung. Now, where does it stand in the market today? So if you look at the market capitalization, first is the revenues. Apple and Samsung have almost the same revenues, about $200 billion approximately. But the market capitalization is a huge difference. See, Apple's market capitalization is 2 trillion, whereas Samsung is about 400 to $500 billion. And of course, it's reflected in the P ratios because P ratio of Samsung is about 10 and that of Apple is about 30. So does the market view Samsung as a truly innovative company? Why is it that Apple is viewed as an innovative company and getting such huge, very excellent PE ratios, which is really, truly remarkable. So when you look back, I mean, if you go through this book and what Jairaj has said so comprehensively in his remarks, is that they copied and they bettered it. And they bettered it at speed and with great efficiency. So then you say, why is it that, if you look at the future products also of Samsung, at least what is mentioned in the book, they are doing the same thing. The core of any device is what they are looking at. Whereas Apple's vision is to make an Apple car, Apple glasses, Apple so on and so forth. They are growing horizontally.
Correct.
But at the end of the day, Samsung wants to be at the core of any product, which is a good strategy. But is that innovation?
No, you're
and
right.
that goes back to their education. What kind of education do they get? That different from the kind of education Americans get.
Point, Pratima, is that today's share of the market, if you take, Samsung is marginally higher than Apple. Samsung has, I think, 19% of the market, the US market. Apple has 16. But just to point out something to you, there's another specter on the horizon, which is Xiaomi, the Chinese company, and that the chairman of the company has made a statement 4 days ago, which says that by 2023, we'll be the world's #1 smartphone company.
If I can add to that, Jairaj,
Yes, sir.
Samsung was the market leader in China for quite a few years. But a year and a half or 2 years ago, they had to shut their factory and leave
Yeah.
because they lost so dramatically. They lost sales in China to Xiaomi, both Xiaomi and a couple of other Chinese companies. So they've actually withdrawn from China,
So I
which
want
is a
to,
huge market.
the frank
But that's
discussion.
also a weakness of this book. As you say, we are not looking east. Even the book is focusing on Apple versus Samsung in the US market, not what's happening in Asia.
Not issue.
You know,
But
so it's very US focused.
Ramesh, Viju, and Pratima, I really want to focus on the leadership of the chairman. Forget about him being a felon and he was convicted and he's a sleazy ball and so on. Point is, all those declarations that I quoted to you, the Frankfurt Declaration, the Tokyo Declaration, the next step forward declaration, all these, they set targets for the company and they were
Without
achieved.
doubt.
That
Without doubt.
impresses me because I look at various boards, so does Pratima, so do all of you. And, I find there's so much of slack there and they, it just meanders. The only issue is that Indian companies don't get exposed because they have the veil of profit in front of them, honestly. Whereas,
In fact, and this guy, if you look at Frankfurt, it was at the time when only he could see it.
Yeah.
It wasn't as if it was apparent to everybody.
the Frankfurt
But it's also, you can also see that he is different from the Koreans because of his Japanese upbringing.
correct.
His house is very refined, his tastes are refined. They keep saying that. So he has this Japanese, perfection and understated elegance and whatnot in all his thinking. It seems to come out a lot in quality because till then the Koreans were not very quality conscious.
And
nor was Samsung.
Single-minded focus on design and quality, which he brought the Pasadena guys. He made all these engineers go around the world 9 weeks and visit Louvre and visit, Leaning Tower of Pisa, Taj Mahal. All that, to me brings out an eclectic mind. Maybe the guy was in cahoots with the president and all that. That is
But Jairaj, what I will say is a lot of good corporate leaders, even in India, I know, for example, when in Wipro, we were less than 100 million, we put a plan for a $4 billion turnover.
correct.
Okay. So it happened in one of these kind of an offsite meetings. I know, for example, if you see the whole story of Tata Digital, the transformation what Tata Group is undergoing in the last 5 years, I think it will be a huge new book. It will come by the time the whole success happens. It is a complete transformation of the group from ground up. And of course, it happened because they got somebody from TCS who has a good understanding of the technology. So what it shows is people who are very open if they are in a leadership position and who are very globally connected. I think his Japanese upbringing and some of those things really help. That makes a difference. If the people are inside, then they won't know.
So the other thing, Ramesh, and you worked and Viju and Pratima, is this top-down view of company management. The boss says it and you guys implement it. No participatory, flat, no hierarchy management. Do it. So is that the panacea?
No, but that is true of Apple also, right? If you say the whole Apple story is like Steve Jobs' story. Okay, see, the influence of the top management is disproportionate. There is no doubt on that.
Right.
But at the same time, good company is the leaders who take that and then make it happen. So many times it is only the idea people who are recognized, but the people who made things happen, they are very critical. And the company has grown them. That is to the credit. So those companies where they have this combination of the executioners and the leader. You need both of them.
I don't think it's a panacea. I think there are stages in an organization. There's a stage when it's small and you need the equivalent of Steve Jobs, a founder, whatever it is, to really drive the vision and so on. There's a stage when you outgrow that. And if you hold on to that model with a large company, then you're in deep trouble. Because at some point you have to find leaders at all levels and across the organization and start a delegatory process. It cannot be this one guy. So I think there are times for everything.
I also
It depends upon your philosophy, you know. See,
Yeah.
if you want to be a truly innovative, see, Samsung is not innovative. They copy and they better what they copy. If you want to be truly innovative, this top-down approach will never work. And therefore, you find a lot of innovations coming from US. It's the so-called democratic way of doing things. And the freedom to talk, even with Steve Jobs, his core group were very vocal with him. And they were also very loyal to him because they were, of course, maybe of the same intelligence or whatever you call that. But unless you have democracy in a way where you can voice your opinions, which did not happen in Samsung. It did not happen. Unless you have that true innovations will never come out.
There was no democracy in Apple, Pratima.
No.
Sorry.
No.
If you read Walter Isaacson.
Steve Jobs ruled it. But the core group always had a say in the matters. The core group with whom he sort of aligned with. The rest of the company did not have.
I think we're getting mixed up here. If I can just kind of elaborate what Pratima is saying, ideas and innovation and institution. I think the ideas, what you're saying, Pratima, came from the core group in Apple, if I hear you right, and that led to innovation. Whereas you're juxtapositioning that against Samsung, where the ideas, if I may say, were copied and not definitely originating within that core group. If I read what Pratima is saying. So I think
I'm just saying that Samsung's philosophy is better what you see.
But what about
and
all
they
the
kept doing it fantastically well, you know?
Because what Ramesh just mentioned.
That outbeat Apple, Galaxy S, Galaxy S3, Galaxy S4, and then that folding phone that they released in 2019. I mean, those were all technologically so much ahead of Apple in terms
That's true, but that is incremental innovation. It is not big bang innovation.
And it's also branding. I think it's the whole question of branding.
Yeah,
branding
I will add here.
Yes.
I know. I think the author gives a lot of credit to the advertising and marketing team, which is largely American. You know?
It is.
And I think he gives more credit to them than to the Samsung production or quality or innovation. So primarily, I think he's just praising the Americans. That's what I gathered from the book. That's.
I think Saroj.
Yeah, I also support Pratima's view on this, that, you know, the valuation of Apple is because of their real genius. You know, if you look at America as whole, you know, I mean, forget Samsung right now. Just look at what they are doing in Mars. They've got that little helicopter called Ingenuity. You know, their atmosphere is 1% of ours, and it's flying to a height of nearly 12 meters. Right now, that's the sort of a genius sort of innovations going. And Apple is also probably looking at various innovations, and smartphone is no longer going to be the long-term product. You know, and that's where the numbers which Pratima put out shows. I think the people realize that, you know, it is the innovation which has to come, not this incremental thing, you know, and this sort of very rigid structures will work. You know, I mean, dictatorships will work in, you know, producing certain things. But if you want innovation, then you definitely have to be totally different. You can't have a structure like this. And that's where the numbers also show up.
So I think, so what do we want in India is the question. Thanks. I mean, I agree, incremental innovation is not good in front of, you know, transformational innovation, all that great, I agree. But for a country like India, where we are, where we have nothing. What do we require?
Again, I mean, I
First
would
thing is
say,
we need less corruption. See, the fundamental problem in India is corruption. You know, the political system is so corrupt, the society is so corrupt, it just goes in everywhere. You know, I mean, into the religion, you know, all religions are corrupt. You know, so if you're going to have a society like this, it is difficult to get. But if you look at innovation, I can tell you there are small companies in India with amazing innovation. Whether it is in pharma, why did our IT industry bloom like this? It's because of the innovations that come in. There are so many startups like that. But it is because of the terrible corruption we are in. You know, we are not able to beat that corruption system and move out. Of course, we are continuously innovating too. I think India is also very innovative. We go to lots of companies, highly innovative. You know, I you know, just because I'm a small company here, but I think we are very, very innovative in our own ways. You know, but we cannot produce the mass like China or Korea regimented things because we are not a society like that. But if you could somehow remove corruption and the political corruption and the bureaucratic corruption, we could really be a different country. You know, we could be like America. That's what I personally feel.
See, I believe the India decade is yet to come, and I think we are well on the pathway. In fact, I was reading somewhere when the country changed from $2 trillion to $5 trillion economy, the kind of changes, the kind of capabilities that automatically happen. It is like when you move from, I know, you know, my father was able to educate me, and so where I am. The same thing will happen at a country level. The moment the country reaches certain level of size, certain level of you know, sophistication and infrastructure and all of those things, the things will change. I am very positive because of the way things are here. You know, we will see a huge change in the next 10 years.
Ramesh, I'm glad you're so positive, but you know, I agree we are positive, but you know, I've been in business here and setting up manufacturing and, you know, running it for the last, you know, 40 years, right? The corruption is what doesn't let you grow, you know, and that unless that changes, I also have a very positive outlook of the country. I think we will, you know, at one day get over it. But that corruption is a sapping thing in this country, from the politicians and the bureaucrats. When you have to deal with them on a day-to-day basis, when you get into manufacturing and things like this, it is debilitating, you know. But as Indians, we keep fighting and keep trying to move, you know. And so if that can be removed, and I am sure it will, whether it's going to be in our lifetime, I'm not sure. But when it does get removed, we'll be a country which is totally different.
can I just add quickly to this?
Pardon?
Can I add, I said quickly to this? When South Korea started in 1961, they were poorer than us, right? And if you study their economic development to where they are now, corruption was huge, you know, at various points, as you can see in this book itself. But the difference is that that the broad objectives of the authoritarian presidents was to develop the country. It wasn't against the country, even if they were corrupt. And the second thing is that at petty bureaucracy, there was not much corruption. The corruption was at the, you know, the owner of Samsung and the president kind of levels. So it didn't affect every little small guy. But the other 2 or 3 important things. One is that even in 1961, when they were poorer than India, they had more than 85% literacy. And that is a very critical difference that they have. So they could quickly build on that. They were already literate. And then there were 2, 3 other things. They focused more on agriculture and building up the rural economy in the early stages, which we forgot. Along with building the heavy industry, they also did a lot of work in building agriculture and the rural economy, which we didn't do much about in all our 5-year plans. So there are 2, 3 things there. But I don't think corruption alone. But the other contribution here is worldwide research seems to indicate that as you get richer, like Ramesh said, one of the things that happens is that petty corruption goes down. Big corruption at the top may become even bigger, but petty corruption goes down. So let's hope that that will happen.
Yeah,
And the last point, sorry, on Jayaraj's thing about, you know, what do we need in terms of hierarchical things or not. I think again that, you know, it's not an either or story. you need a strong hierarchical organization for execution, discipline, and so on. You can't keep on debating everything. You'll never execute anything, right? And you need freedom to think and so on at the research and innovation level. Whole organization can't be innovating. There are lots of guys who've got to just do, and there has to be discipline in doing. And so you need that mix. And depending on where you stand as an organization, do you need more of one thing or more of the other? Is what it's a balance. Everything, it's not either or, right? And the same thing is true for the country as a whole. There are lots of things that we have to do instead of keeping on debating. The argumentative Indian, everybody knows everything, right? But you won't do anything.
Right,
But at the same time, you need to also debate.
Vijayalakshmi.
Yes,
Thank you,
one thing
Mr.
that I
Jairaj. That was very interesting, and I really enjoyed the book. What was very clear in the Samsung thing is they got the best ideas. The hierarchy decided the benchmark, and it was just you had to execute to reach that benchmark. And also, Vinod, as Vinod says, corruption is there everywhere. I don't think there's a single country which doesn't have corruption in whichever level it is to be. But I also agree with Ramesh that India will definitely, we have a lot of small, startups and people who are doing extremely well in small, limited areas. But in the Samsung story, it was just that these were the people who decided what was to be done, and the others just had to execute to reach that. And they got the ideas from all over, like it was mentioned in the book, from Japan. The precision, the focused levels of execution was what emerged from the book. And there was no two ways about it. Benchmark was laid and you do it, and it had to be done. So, I mean, in that way, in India, there is a little, not that regimented discipline still, which probably will come in the times to come, because a little more liberal as far as organizations are concerned. But I'm sure one day we too will be somewhere. And thank you for suggesting this book. It was very interesting. Quite a lot of, what happens, the intrigues were very well brought out by the author. And I think it happens in many, many companies and many established companies too. So thank you for that.
I just want to add one thing here, because Viju's point, this whole question of the 50s were devoted to education in Korea. In fact, there's a wonderful analysis by Myron Werner of MIT. I mean, it's an old book of South Korea and India. When he visited India, he was asked to come, and how they tackled, they went and made sure that everybody got their class 12 and their class 10, class 12. Of course, criticism was there that you only had a few select universities in South Korea, not like the proliferation of universities that we have here for the first 3 years of college. So that apparently also brought in this whole question of preparing the Koreans for the industrialization. And we're still, I mean, I really like the way that, Vijaya is very hopeful, and so is everybody else. But as long as we don't have this jugaad, something will happen, ho jayega. We have to get rid of that. And,
yes.
Our nephew, he was in this, the Samsung place, that big factory. He was there for 6 months or 9 months. Till the job is finished, the young person, 27-year-old or 26, he doesn't worry whether his child is sick or his wife is waiting for him. They finish the job by 11 or 12. And he said that that's one thing he came back with from Korea, this whole question of the work ethics.
Absolutely.
And I think Ramesh has spoken about that too, that work ethics. कल आके जाएगा नहीं तो कोई और करेगा, हमारे ऊपर नहीं है. That I think is not there, and I'm not sure if it was just for Samsung, or did it apply to Honda or wherever the other companies of. But thanks again, Mr. Jairaj. I mean, you opened up a new vista of discussion. And
thanks, Sri. I also want, to, with Pratima's permission, to ask all our esteemed members one thing that has been troubling me, which is this Samsung emphasis on HR and on the generalist. If you remember, I quoted the first chairman when he said,
Yes.
face people, interpret candidates' eye, nose, lips, and get a sense of who they
Correct.
are.
Absolutely.
Select those who value loyalty, prioritize the cosmic self over the individual, public over the private. Capacity for diligent work comes from patriotism for a greater public cause. This flies in the face of all these, what's it called, domain expertise and, vertical specialization, etc., isn't it? Because today the generalist is a much abused concept.
Yeah.
How do you guys, how do you respond to that?
So my response is, if you go to large companies, Tata's had the Tata Administrative Service. If you go to Reliance, in all of these places, what I find is 90% success is about knowing the organization. You know how to make things happen. You need 10%, or the specialist is what you need. So if it is like what these guys have done, Samsung has done, by bringing in the designers, bringing in the US marketing kind of an focus and others, whereas they said manufacturing we will do, you please don't touch. So I feel the way the world is today, you need specialists, okay? But to say that a specialist will come and transform an organization, it doesn't happen. You need somebody who is inside to make those things happen.
Yes.
It's a combination.
I agree with Ramesh, but to add to that, I think the statements, Gerard, that you're talking about, if I'm not mistaken, were of Lee the First.
Correct.
In the 40s and 50s, when he was creating and building an organization which was very small. But if you look at it now or in the last 15, 20 years, the whole marketing success in the US is done by marketing specialists.
Correct.
The manufacturing or the whatever will be done by manufacturing specialists. So there are specialists who have their role. And as Ramesh said, there are the generalists who have their role.
Correct.
But I agree with you that all organizations in the world today, compared to 30, 40, 50 years ago, are more, give more weight to specialists than to generalists. Right or wrong? That's the current trend.
And it's totally wrong, I think, in the medical industry. You cannot find an MBBS doctor to treat your cough and cold. You have to go to an MD,
True.
So you need more generalists in the medical profession, certainly.
See, this education which Viju mentioned and also Vijayalakshmi. See, in 1983, they were thinking of semiconductors. I mean, that is really amazing. I think both Kuri and I think Jairaj mentioned we were almost at the same level.
Yeah.
But in 1983, they were thinking, and that I think is because of the Japanese influence. Japanese had colonized them and they have brought in their expertise, so on and so forth. But that was remarkable. And the other one, of course, was Lee too. I think he was the driving force. I don't think his current son is like that. The present, the person who is about to take over as chairperson is like that. But Lee too really changed the organization. He drove the organization with his philosophies. He did that. And in that respect, in India also, coming back to Jairaj's point on what is happening in India. In India also, at least in private sector, they work very hard. And all this Chalta Hai and all that is all public sector. And we've been oriented to public sector for a long time. And generalists, so on and so forth, whether it's good or not, that's a different matter. But in private sector, they work very hard. And you have very good companies in private sector, but they don't have the scale. Why is it that India has not been able to make the scale that Korea did? That is baffling. That is
a good question.
Good question.
I totally endorse what Pratima says. That's exactly what I'm saying.
What's the answer?
Incidentally, any of you use Samsung? Because I know a lot of people who swear by Samsung.
I use only iPhone.
I think, so coming to this scale thing, how do we achieve scale? I mean, many of us are on the board, and the scale issue always keeps coming up as to why are we not able to get that scale with China, Korea, so on and so forth have got. What is it that's lacking for them?
See, we came, Pratima, from a manufacturing, which from an era of license, Raj, right? And we haven't got rid of it. It is still there. You can say anything. It's still very much there. You take GST. I mean, the way the government implements anything is still purely that sort of a license Raj attitude. You know, and they look at private sector, you know, like I'm telling you honestly, if I go and sit with a government official, first thing he thinks is that I'm from the other side of the border. You know, he doesn't think we are in the same team. That itself makes a difference, you know. So this is what it is. It's cultural. I mean, the whole bureaucracy and politician has to change.
That's true. And the other thing, Pratima, I think is that we started with no capital, right? Which is why the government felt that they had to come into the commanding heights of the economy and so on in the 50s. And then given the attitude till 91, we were not looking out. The Indian market was very small. Licensing was based on the Indian market. By necessity, every manufacturer was small. To start thinking big, you can only do it if you think of the world as your market. So that's only 20 years old. Reliance has done it, and you need to go and buy much bigger. So slowly, the thinking will come, and the access to funds, which we didn't have before. Now there are many ways you can fund internationally. Till the 90s, what did we have? We had only.
Thank you, Gerard. That was a very, for me, it was a very comprehensive presentation given by Gerard. I mean, and the book was quite rambling. Yeah. And to bring it together like this and to make it in a whole, like a whole thing, it was very good for me. It was very good.
Thank you, Pratima. I enjoyed it, Pratima, because it was. Thank you for the opportunity, and you suggested the book. Initially, I had some misgivings. I thought the book was hardly the kind that we should discuss in our BIC club, which is such a high intellectual body. But then, as I got reading, I thought there were some learnings that we can put before such a enlightened group and get their advice and suggestions. And I think my purpose has been more than served in reviewing that book and in placing all these before this. Thank you very much, Pratima. Thank you.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you.
That is Dean Nagaraj Subbarao, Dean of our business school at Dayanand Sagar University.
Okay.
Yeah, and my apologies. I'm attending this through my Apple iPhone. So I just had a quick point, fascinating talk. And some of the takeaways were, of course, the chairman Lee Chung-hee, who says that Samsung is in perpetual crisis. And I work with Koreans. They're extremely hardworking people, but they have this sense of perpetual insecurity, I think, which comes from their geographic location, their sense of threat from North Korea, their experience in World War II, and then, of course, the division of their country, what occurred with. And I think there's a major factor which in my opinion, is not really comparable to India's, of course, their size. And two is the influence of the Americans. It's not that the Japanese who contributed too much, but the Americans after the Korean Civil War, who invested heavily in Korea, I think make a big difference. So, and it brings to mind what Andy Grove said about only the paranoid surviving. And I think that animal energy is what is very visible in a lot of Koreans when you actually bump into them. Say another interesting point is of the Samsung risk. And I think, if you can draw a parallel to what happened to Nokia and how it contributed to the Finnish economy. And when Nokia imploded, it actually dragged Finland's economy down. And it's not a very distant parallel. It's pretty close. So we'll have to wait and watch. And Korea per se, in comparison to India, is not a civilization at all. It's a pretty young country. We're an old set of characters who have been around, been there and done that. So while I'm not saying that everything is fine with India, I think parallels are a little difficult to draw. And I also feel that, as a professor, I don't like to get anecdotal, but I was at Carnegie Mellon in 2019. I was talking to a Korean professor, and he was telling me how Korea is actually about 50 years behind the United States. And that is the thought of a Korean professor who is one of their most well-educated people, who works in a top Korean company. So fascinating book, but I think Samsung has a long way to go before it shows that degree of sustainability in really overtaking some of the big guns like Apple. And India, I think historically we've gone through a great deal. Large country, several problems, but I think we'll get there in the next probably 100 years. We've been there for 10,000 years, 100 years is not too much.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Jairaj.
Bye, Pratima. Thank you.
Very good,
Thank you
Jairaj.
very much.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Thank you, Jairaj.
Thank you.
Nice afternoon.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Pratima.
Thanks very much. Have a
Thank
good
you, everybody.
weekend. Be safe. Cheers.